The Trump news is coming at us like a fire hose once again. And instead of getting drowned in that fire hose tonight, we are going to begin what I hope is a series of reports to voters that are absolutely critical to voter participation in a democracy. Most important thing to know when you look at a ballot is what you are voting for. And that isn't easy to do because your only choice on the ballot is who you are voting for. Many voters mistakenly thought when they voted for Donald Trump that they were voting for someone who would get things done in their community. That's because most of us, and that very much includes me, don't always know who to credit for the good things or the bad things that government has done. Who did that? Who built that new bridge? Who rebuilt our airport to make it a state-of-the-art airport? Why did that new chips factory locate in that town? Who did that? The answers to those questions are critical to informed voter participation in a democracy. People will automatically get refunds from airlines next year when their flights are canceled, and they won't know that Joe Biden did that. People will be driving over bridges with their kids in the back seat, not knowing that that bridge was rebuilt and made safer by Joe Biden. It would take much more than the full hour of this program to describe what Joe Biden did as president of the United States. But for most other presidents, it would take less than an hour to describe what they did in the presidency. Donald Trump, in 4 years, did tax cuts and tariffs that raised prices, and he built a little bit of wall at the southern border. Not 2,300 miles of border wall, just a tiny fraction of that. That's what he did. You have probably heard many times on this program that what Joe Biden built as president compares only to what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did in 12 years in the presidency before there were term limits for president. President Roosevelt's revolutionary program that changed everything about the way we live in America was called the New Deal. The most poverty-stricken group of Americans in the 1930s were the elderly. President Roosevelt created Social Security and provided a financial security minimum for people over 65 that never existed before. President Roosevelt enacted the first minimum wage, massive infrastructure spending all over the country that provided jobs and improved communities all over, everywhere we live in this country. Donald Trump kept promising an infrastructure bill when he was president and kept having infrastructure weeks and did absolutely nothing. The Trump administration didn't write one sentence of an infrastructure bill, never mind have a vote on it. There should be a name for what Joe Biden did. Franklin Roosevelt came up with the name the New Deal when he was running for president for the first time in 1932, in the middle of the worst depression in the 20th century. He promised America what he called a New Deal for the American people. The phrase caught on right away, and reporters began referring to the New Deal in the first year of the Roosevelt presidency. And we still talk about it today as the most important turning point in the definition of what was possible in American government. What Joe Biden did should have a name like that. Everyone knew what you meant when you were talking about the New Deal in 1934 or 1944 or 1954. Our next guest has a name for what Joe Biden did.
President Biden understands that policy is about everyday life.
The middle class built the country.
It's about people.
And unions built the middle class.
He doesn't just see a road or a bridge. He sees somebody's commute home back to their family. He doesn't just see ships and ports and supply chains. He sees ways for us to get the things we count on at the grocery store. That's what all of this is actually about. Taken together, a belief in how to use government to solve problems, a recognition of what we were up against, and a level of ambition. I think all of that is what has added up into the enormous progress that we've made in recent years. Something collectively I like to think of as the big deal.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. The big deal. Let's get it started right now. Let's see if it can catch on.
I hope it does. You know, first of all, I think it's a Biden-esque turn of phrase, but also the only way to really capture the transformative investments that have been made, certainly in transportation infrastructure, the part that I've had the honor and privilege of working on, but also the removal of lead pipes that have been poisoning children for decades in this country, the extension of broadband internet access to millions of households, the improvements to the energy grid. Unlike some of the other moments in our infrastructure history that had a single piece of infrastructure that was changed. Think of the Interstate Highway Program under Eisenhower, a massive achievement, but it was one thing. The Transcontinental Railroad under Lincoln. But this is a little bit hard to characterize because it touches so many things that the only thing that all of those different kinds of investments really have in common is the scale, the scope, the imagination, and that recognition that confronted with a crisis, in some ways, as FDR was confronted with a crisis, President Biden responded with a level of ambition, saying, let's take the tools of government, use them to solve both short-term and long-term problems. And that's what this decade of infrastructure is all about.
How do we get voters to understand who did that? This fundamental thing. All they get in the voting booth is a name, and they don't know why are things running so much better in my town or in my state because of things that people in government did. Might be your governor, might be your mayor. You've been a mayor. You've been trying to get that credit for yourself, I'm sure, as mayor sometimes.
Yeah, and you know, we have been out there working with governors and mayors because one of my favorite rules of political mathematics is somehow it works out that if two willing parties share credit for something like this, each party walks away with 2/3 of the credit, and it can be a beautiful thing. Of course, we've also seen people trying to take credit for projects that they opposed. I mean,
really?
You know, I try not to be cynical about this, but again and again, we've seen often it's been Republican members of the House, you know, telling their constituents, "I delivered this project." It was out of President Biden's
Let me ask you something about the mechanics of this, right? Because you've got transportation, huge piece of the infrastructure bill, and the way I know the way that works. I mean, I was also the chief of staff of the Environment and Public Works Committee in the Senate, which has a lot to do with the public works aspects of the infrastructure bill, and so I know when you pass one of these laws, the transportation secretary gets calls, gets letters from members of Congress saying, can you please make sure this project in my district, in my town, gets funded? Have you been getting those requests as secretary from Republicans who voted against this?
All the time. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Why don't you just run out to a microphone every day?
It's so tempting. It's so tempting. But, you know, President Biden made it clear to this administration that we're not going to punish Americans, constituents, for the behavior of their representatives.
Oh, sure. No,
so
but I
we
mean,
do a
please
project
punish the people who voted against it.
Well, we're certainly going to call them out.
Yeah.
And we have. And you know, I think it's important just to remind everybody that this infrastructure package didn't just happen. We talk about it now like it couldn't have been any other way. It was 3 years ago this week that President Biden signed it. But, you know, 3 years and 2 months ago, everybody in this town was writing political obituaries for that legislation again and again. There were, you know,
including me. And the reason I was, and I've said this to the president, is that when I worked in the Senate, what you guys did was impossible. It couldn't have been done. We all would have said to you, well, sorry, we don't have the votes. We can't get there. You know, it's a 50-50 Senate. I mean, we used to have 57 Democrats and struggle to get things done in a much more cooperative environment, you know. And so I didn't know what play to run to get this done. But Joe Biden did. And once I saw that happen, I just sat back not knowing what you were capable of next, and you kept doing it.
Yeah, it turns out that his decades in the Senate and in public service really came in handy. As you know, I'm somebody who's a big believer in what a new generation can bring in terms of leadership. But I've got to say, you know, there were times when I thought, OK, I guess it's not going to happen. And he kept coming back. People said, oh, it's foolish for you to come back after one version of it collapsed. He brought people back for another version. I sat there in the Oval Office watching him with Republican and Democratic members of the House and the Senate not giving up. And sure enough, this happened. But you know, what's really striking is in the same way that we had legislators try to take credit for projects that they voted against in the last few years, I think for the next 4 years, we're going to see an entire administration's version of that. Because, of course, President Trump did not deliver an infrastructure package, and he opposed the one that,
Yes.
that President Biden delivered. But for the next 4 years, there are going to be more and more projects that we started. The nature of these projects is they very rarely get done in 1 year or even 3 years. Many of them get done in 5 or 7 years. They will be creating jobs and improving lives, not just during the next 4 years, but even beyond that. And so I think it will continue to be important to, frankly, communicate that we will have handed the new president.
There's projects in here that are 10 years away from completion. And I mean, when those bridges go across the Cape Cod Canal, for example, which I happen to know about, which got funded, which people have been trying to do something about for years, unless it's named the Biden Bridge, I don't think people are going to get it. Is there a way? I've tried to describe the New Deal in, 2 minutes, and I've come up with versions of it from time to time. And there's been so many books written about it, and I think we all kind of, who know about it, have a handle on it. We can talk about how it includes all sorts of extensions of humanity that we didn't have before, like child labor laws, everything from child labor laws to giant infrastructure projects. Is there a way of describing the big deal that you could get across to people in a clear way? I remember, like LBJ, he brought electricity to rural Texas. That one thing when he was in Congress. And I brought electricity to rural Texas. That was easy to remember. And every time you turned on your light, you knew it was LBJ. This is 68,000 projects around the country. How do you explain it?
Yeah, there's no way to characterize it just one project at a time. I did the math, and I think if I were to visit 3 projects a day for the rest of my life, I still would not live long enough to see all of them. So I think a better way to think of it is what they all have in common. Not just these projects, but the other steps that have taken place under the president's leadership. Things in our department like aviation consumer protection, making it easier to be an airline passenger. Things that took place outside of my department that have made everyday life easier, from getting hearing aids over the counter to the FTC's rule that now says that if you sign up for something like a gym membership or a newspaper subscription, it ought to be just as easy to cancel. What all these things have in common? Here's how I think of it. 3 things. 1, recognizing the scale of the problems that face the country. 2, recognizing that government, not always big government, but the right kind of government can be a solution if used in the right way. And then 3, not being afraid to actually bring those tools to bear in a big way. And that's certainly what happened in the infrastructure space. When we got here, the president was confronted with some of the most enormous and multiplied problems ever to hit our transportation system. It's almost easy to forget just how dramatic it was. Like right now, we're focused on getting the airlines to treat passengers better. Back then, it was making sure the airline sector did not completely go out of business in this country. So it was recognizing that set of problems, using government tools, in this case, making sure that there was a rescue to keep those airlines in business, and then turning around as we faced a new set of problems like delays, cancellations, customer service headaches, and using our tools as a department to confront those. So, yes, there are so many different things that went on in this administration that I think volumes will be written for the rest of my lifetime about their impact. But they do have that pattern in common: a colossal problem, a belief in the potential of good government to make a difference, and then a willingness to go big.